Eric, how do we sound? Is that amplified? Everybody can hear? No? Brett, you can't hear? You- oh, you can hear everything except me. Oh, is it better? How about this? Standing back a bit? That seems amplified, no?
Oh, see, I don't see any light on this thing.
Oh, okay.
It's not powered on yet. That's all. No, you are not. Well, I don't know, Brett, whether you're on drugs or not, but it's not the reason you can't hear anything. This.
You're a magician, Eric.
Electrician.
The electrician.
I get paid a lot. So now I'm gonna turn things down at that end rather than turn this on and suddenly have it go screechy. So have a seat. Hey.
All right, so is.
Not quite there yet.
All right, we're not quite there. Brett, you're the expert, so you got to be giving us the audiologist in the crowd, you know. So.
All right.
Yeah?
Yeah, just go ahead and tell them where they are and who they are and what you are and what they're here for.
No, but we're amplified enough.
What kind of trouble is, bro?
Okay.
Okay, brace yourselves, folks. I think this is going to be fine. If it's not, you can run screaming from the room.
Yeah? Okay.
A light. Let there be a light. Okay.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Very happy to be hosting two speculative prose writers, speculative fiction. Of course, you can only speculate about exactly what we're referring to, but I'm sure we'll be enlightened as the evening progresses. John Teton will be the first reader, and Tobey Hiller the second. So, John, I'll leave it up to you to elucidate the genre you're working in and whatever other things. And I think you have some books here as well, or whatever. Let us know about that. And then after the two featured readers, we'll go between 20 and 25 minutes each. We'll have a short break and then an open session. So anyone who hasn't signed up yet for the open, please do so. I got the list right here. So, John, welcome.
Well, first of all, some thank yous. Bert and Beckett is an amazing thing to still exist in the world after this pandemic the whole world's been through. And its champions have kept it alive and thriving, and it's just such a wonderful environment to have a reading in. So thanks to all of you for doing that. And I also want to thank Lucille Lang Day, who's the publisher of Scarlet Tanager Books, which is a unique and wonderful small independent press based over in the East Bay. And they are the publishers of the book I'm going to read from shortly, called The Book of Geezer. And I want to thank all of you for coming out to see a live reading. This is, of course, something that got torpedoed along with a lot of other aspects of culture when the pandemic hit. But you all made it out here, and I appreciate your being here. So I'm going to try to entertain you a little bit with a bit of speculative fiction. That term is kind of an industry term. The general public doesn't use it very much, but it reflects the industry's recognition that there are books that are fantastical in nature. They often don't involve strict realism or literary realism. They don't necessarily fit into the category of science fiction. And so this general term evolved, and people don't necessarily know what it means. In my case, my novels have always some of the fantastical material, but some have genuine science fiction, some don't. And they all have a serious component of literary realism. I don't mean that the content is serious, capital S, but I mean that it's not just, like, for example, if you open Asimov's Foundation, you're right there with rockets shooting through space right off the bat. And that's not necessarily at all related to the kind of fantastical material in these books. So, The Book of Geezer is about a couple of Northern California teenage twins. Actually, they're 21, but part of the book deals with an earlier experience they had, and their fascination with a secretive elderly neighbor, a black man that they never actually get to meet, but they can see him. He lives on an island in the middle of the lake, and they live on the shore of the lake. And through an attempt to help him, not having been asked for that, they inadvertently end up following him to the inside of the sun and beyond. So, as I mentioned, there are two time periods involved here. The book begins when they're 21. They're bright, talented siblings, and their careers are going gangbusters, but they retain a certain amount of fascination and trauma resulting from an experience that they'd had 4 years earlier at the age of 17. I'm going to read 3 segments from the book, and the first one starts out in the present, and you'll meet Marley and Zeb and hear from their older sister, Relura. There's a tremendous amount that goes on in the sun and in other locations that I won't even touch on here. Not trying to exactly keep secrets, but I think that this selection will be a better way to introduce you to this environment. So we find Marley at a restaurant on the peninsula. She's at Stanford as a plasma science student. And she's meeting with her comrades who are helping her develop a potentially extremely advanced form of aurora generation. This is something that the military and science have experimented with and want to develop, but she has a revolutionary approach to it that would cut the cost by 99%. So here we go. Marley, for the moment at least, was free of worry about the secret. That refers to what had happened 4 years before that they don't want to be telling people because it was so bizarre. They're afraid of being tagged by the media in a way they'd rather not be. She'd even stuffed the chilling memory of being mad-dogged by an owl into a corner of her mind's back rooms. She was surfing some mighty exciting vibes with 4 of her smartest and most fun peers in the hubbub of a hot gourmet brewery in Palo Alto just days before their big pitch meetings with 3 venture capitalist outfits on Sand Hill Road. Newcomer Trey added further whiz-fizz to the high-end froth in which rapid-fire blue humor threaded through brainstorms of novel ways to stimulate gyroharmonic frequencies in the upper atmosphere. She felt so lucky to have come up with an idea for building a more powerful aurora generator at a small fraction of the size and cost of the radio transmission systems employed by the Navy. It could bust open the field of extraterrestrial aurora studies, too, which might wend its way into a spaceflight run at Jupiter in the future. Getting this project off the ground could revolutionize plasma science and, by the way, get her set for life professionally and financially. And hell, her exuberant teammates plowing through dishes of Kobe sliders and linguine provençal were so entertaining to hang out with, she thought for a second that it almost didn't matter whether or not they succeeded. But just for a second. Success glimmered so close on the horizon she was positively giddy. Marley was gearing up to toss into the fray a fantasy about luring some Ames engineering specialists to their team as consultants when she felt her phone buzzing in the pocket of her jeans. Finding Relura, her sister, incoming, she begged off the table chatter and turned to the side to take the call. "Hey, girl, what's up? Egg production okay?" Relura fielded her little sister's double entendre without comment. Marley had been bugging her for news about a possible pregnancy, but Relura stuck with a literal interpretation referring to her hen management duties while house-sitting for the folks during their long weekend in New Orleans. "Except for bloody iridescence they're all laying, we'll have surpluses for you and Zeb to take home from your visit this weekend." "We're visiting this weekend?" "I hope so. Hold on, I want to patch in Zeb." Marley glanced back at her crew while Relura three-wayed their brother into the conversation. When Trey caught her eye, she was tempted to postpone the conversation with her siblings, but she knew better. Something was up. Zeb's cheerful voice came on the line. "Hey, Relura. What are you up to, Z?" "Chillaxing with Alyssa and Shangri-Larian." Marley thought more than enough time had passed without her presence having been announced. Relura informs me that we're staging a reunion tomorrow. Ah, both of you at once. A big deal must be afoot. Isn't it automatically a big deal whenever the three of us are together? Both twins recognized that as a classic deft Relura dodge, which confirmed their suspicions. Marley feigned ignorance of its significance. My, you must be getting lonesome up there without Sean. First of all, Sean is here. He's helping me cook. The twins heard the presentation of Relura's case interrupted by their brother-in-law whispering, "Hey!" in the background, and what the twins suspected was playful annoyance, a finding confirmed when Relura squealed, "Yipe!" a moment later. Marley figured Relura must have grabbed her husband's ass and suffered immediate retaliation. Either Relura thought her younger siblings wouldn't notice, or she didn't care much if they did. How thinly the veneer of professional dignity lies on the surface of high-energy newlyweds. Marley was delighted that the romance between her sister and her orthopedist hubby was flourishing with such elan, but she was tempted to suggest that they get a room. True, he is leaving tomorrow afternoon. The Niners are in town. Ah, yes, Sean had recently been added to the football squad sports doc roster. But I won't get lonesome here. I have 2,000 frogs to keep me company. No doubt Relura was barely in her teens when the family had moved to the lake, and their proximity to the froggy metropolis in the swamp surrounding the feeding creek had catalyzed her fascination with the order Anura. No one was surprised when she headed to the pros as a herpetologist and was signed to a biomedical research team on the peninsula. We haven't been together without the parents since last summer, Relura continued. But parents will be there, right? They're getting back from New Orleans tomorrow night. Not until after 10. If you two get here early enough, we can have dinner together and, pardon the expression, hold a tribal council before I have to leave for the airport. I won't tell them you're there, and then you can surprise them when they walk in. Another attempt at artful dodging. Of course, Marley couldn't pick up the folks in her tiny roadster on her way past the airport, but it was odd to have the twins arrive not all that long before Relura would have to make a 4-hour airport run. Relura clearly wanted some time alone with her sibs. The twins cooperated by not asking. Relura would get to the point in her own good time. In the background, Marley could hear Zeb laying out Relura's plan to Alyssa, his girlfriend. He mentioned Relura's filial surprise motive, which didn't go very far explaining why Alyssa wasn't on the invitation list, despite Relura's having taken an immediate liking to her on the 2 occasions they'd met. Apparently, Zeb and Alyssa had plans to attend a dance concert Saturday night produced by Alyssa's favorite choreography comrade, so this wasn't the lightest of asks. Nonetheless, Alyssa accepted the inevitable with grace and charm. Meanwhile, Trey and the rest of the dining team splitting up in laughter. Marley felt torn when he looked at her. She really relished this dinner party, but there was no getting around the unusualness of Relura's move. The ease with which Zeb had scuttled part of his weekend with Alyssa meant that he had picked up on the same thing. Furthermore, it was unsettling that this was happening the same evening she'd been spooked by the owl. She was tempted to wonder if there might be some connection between the two, but let's not get too crazy here. It was true the three hadn't gotten together for a while, so, going with the certainty of the incoming tide, she told Relura, "I'm in," and signed off. She tried to refocus on her dining mate's dance of wit and guffaws, even as internal questions about what else this weekend had in store gnawed away from below. So all 3 of these siblings had had strange experiences with animals in the hours preceding that little conversation. And what that leads to develops further in the second or third part of the book. But there are several, you might say, flashbacks to what had happened 4 years earlier, and I'm going to address that in these next 2 portions. It involved their, initially sneaking over to the island in the middle of the lake where the man they call Geezer, not knowing his actual name, lived, and they did not realize that he was not the decrepit, sorry figure they'd always assumed him to be, but was a tremendously powerful man in his 70s who almost chased them across a lake swimming while they were in a boat. But they were so intrigued to follow him and see why he was so obsessed about an upcoming total solar eclipse taking place in Antarctica. They got their older sister to act as chaperone as three of them, traveled to South America and beyond to the Southern Ocean where this eclipse was going to take place. So we'll pick up this account where they finally reach an iceberg at the exact location, the latitude and longitude that they had learned that Geezer was going to be exploring. And they discovered flocks of very unusual types of birds to be in that environment, and the birds were acting in a most unusual fashion. They hadn't yet seen Geezer himself, but they figured he might be atop these icebergs. This iceberg, and as some of you may know, they may be, 5, 6, 7 stories tall. A tiny peep from the upper branches of Marley's mind inquired if it were too late to turn back now. No harder than returning to the top of a cliff halfway through a 100-foot dive. We're seeing this one through. Zeb felt his hair standing on end. That unnatural assembly of birds made it crystal clear that something extremely eerie was going down. He leapt from the dinghy to the narrow ice beach and helped his sisters drag the dinghy out of the water, keeping an eye on the avian dance visible over the plateau walls and under the slimming crescent sun. The varying arcs flown by the flamingo, swallow, falcon, toucan, hummingbird, and owl decreased in height till they fluttered down to rest out of sight on the hidden plateau. Ark, the Arctic tern, indefatigable, continued his flying frenzy as intermittent sparks shot up alongside him from the plateau. "Our man's up there, Zeb. Let's do it." "Do what?" Rillura demanded to know in a shaky voice as she secured the dinghy to a block of ice at the shore. "Worry not, sis," called Zeb, worrying her plenty as he began to scale the 50-foot-high ice cliff. Marley followed close behind, fighting off dizziness from the deafening bird sounds swelling and eddying around them. More high-powered sparks shot upward in the darkening sky from the plateau, leading Zeb to speed up his climb on the craggy ice. Growing fearful for his safety, Marley hurried to catch up to him in case he should suddenly need a helping hand. Near the top of the wall, Zeb's right foot slipped for a moment. Rillura shouted, "Come back, you two!" loud enough to be heard up above. Seconds later, the haunting apparition of Geezer appeared above them, clad in an old Air Force parka and holding Wardenclyffe 3 on his shoulder like a rocket launcher, spitting lightning bolts toward the sun. His welder's goggles hid his eyes, but not his scorching fury. "Idiots!" Zeb began slipping again, yelling this time in what appeared to be the beginning of a final plunge. His sisters called out in horror, but Geezer, still holding his heavy contraption in one arm, dropped to one knee, seized the boy's reaching arm, and with the aplomb of an orchestra conductor, lifting his baton, swung Zeb onto the plateau, pale and breathless. Rillura moved laterally to a spot under Zeb and called up to Geezer, "Thank you, sir, so much." "Shut up, lady," he roared with the guttural blast of an angry demigod. "Get these brats out of here, or you're going to regret bringing them here as long as you live." He then refocused his attention on the Wardenclyffe, adding, "But that may be just a matter of seconds." Having scaled the cliff to join her brother and Geezer atop the plateau, Marley froze in terror, too spellbound to pay much heed to the hundreds of birds gawking at them. Totality hit, freeing the distant stars in the corona of our closest one to shine in the darkness. Geezer stepped back to the center of the plateau with the Wardenclyffe on one shoulder and Ark perched on the other. "Stay back," he growled. "This charge could kill you, and if it does, it's your own damn fault." He aimed the Wardenclyffe right at the eclipsed sun and shot crackling lightning bolts at its target. The din and the birds' shrieks drowned out Rillura's cries to "Come back down carefully." A rippling iris-like aurora unrolled from the zenith, filling the darkness beyond the sun's corona and enshrouding them with a filmy column of swirling plasma. The twins looked in speechless alarm at Rillura down below them on the ice. With a deafening sound of sucked sea and the breaking of an ice mountain, Rillura seemed to fall below them farther and faster by the second, along with the iceberg, the boats, the sea, all plummeting into invisibility far beneath the piece of ice holding Geezer, the twins, and Ark. The entire moon-shadow-striped earth filled their view, falling in space, until they found themselves slowing and swaying over the surface of the moon. So that's a step en route to the sun. And sometime later, we'll encounter them, the three of them, Geezer, who has begun to speak a little bit to them. They've had tremendous adventures in the sun that I won't go into at all here, but in what they view as a hopeful sign that they may be able to get back to Earth, they are being transported on an interplanetary journey courtesy of an enormous bird they call an aurora bird, who's got a 2-mile-long wingspan and is kind of made of a gauzy plasmic substance. So they think that they're going to Earth, but now the aurora bird has surprised them. And it seems to be headed well beyond Earth. So Geezer has an offer for these two youngsters who are desperate to get home. That bright little spot at 2 o'clock is an asteroid. Every second we're getting closer to Jupiter. I'm offering you your one and only chance at ever seeing your sister and parents again, so stop being fools. He has a plan for them. Now focus. He thinks that if he can get aurorized with his gadget and become as enormously magnified in size as the aurora bird, that he'll be able to battle with the aurora bird and force the aurora bird to take them back to Earth. You're going to have to blast me at high power and pray I survive long enough to get the jump on this plasmic thief. I've got more than 30 trillion cells for you to hit, so you've got to keep your aim sharp and plug away till I'm completely out of here. I don't fancy sacrificing a free ride to the outer solar system in vain, so you damn well better not blow it. Zeb took a deep breath and looked at his sister. How's your stomach? It's knots have knots. But can you do this? Because he might be right. She closed her eyes a moment. I'm not up for handling a life or death decision. Not handling this one is a decision. Between Geezer and our family, there are 6 lives at stake, 15 if you count the birds, and the time for a decision could be gone in a minute. Offering Marley no quarter to dither, Geezer pointed to the ignition lever. This spring lock tab's a safety. When we're lined up, pull that first, then the lever, and let it rip. He left them and crossed the beach to gauge the spot on the far side of the Mexijar most likely to line up with the sun. Planting his feet, he pressed his back against the star wall and commanded, Zap me! Marley turned pale at the sight of Geezer's head-shaped annular eclipse of the sun. Zeb snapped, Marley! The gravity in Mr. Optimist's tone of voice brought her around. She placed herself in front of Zeb and grasped the near end of the Wardenclyffe's barrel. Fire! Bellowed Geezer. She took a deep breath, steadied the barrel toward the sun, and grimaced. Do it! Zeb gulped and pulled the ignition lever on the Wardenclyffe. With a roar like a jet engine punctuated by staccato drum beats, a lightning-like blaze shot out of the barrel and hit Geezer full in the face. An auroral glow emanated from his hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes, soon becoming too bright for the twins to make out details. Ark and his fellow 8 birds hovered nearby in fixed position like stars in a living constellation. The longest 20 seconds of the twins' lives had begun, each second a capacious cavern overflowing with second thoughts demanding full hearings. Zeb was vaguely aware that Shang, what they call the aurora bird, was flying past another asteroid, but at the moment he couldn't care less. Concern about their whereabouts was subsumed in his realization that even though Marley had rarely subordinated her better judgment to his, in this instance she had relied and acted upon his insistence that doing as Geezer had commanded was the right and necessary thing to do, so whatever calamity was about to ensue would be on him. The fertility of Zeb's imagination worked against him. What if Geezer turned into a chimera with a giant eyeball embedded in his scalp, glaring at him in condemnation for having been so stupid as to follow Geezer's order, even though it had been delivered as a threat? Or a liver bouillabaisse with floating molars, alveoli, kneecap chips, and toe tips. Worse, Geezer knew Marley's similar fears were peppered with a loss of trust in his judgment that would likely last till their dying moments, which, come to think of it, might not be very far off. And the idea of that being her final thought still hurt like a sting from a rat-sized wasp. As the 5th second crossed to the 6th, a new impulse jumped into Zeb's view. Maybe it wasn't too late to stop and prevent the worst. They shouldn't succumb to the weakness that had trapped countless souls since time immemorial, doubling down on terrible mistakes they'd begun, as if that would somehow snuff out gnawing doubts, despite their inner recognition that they were making a very bad thing all the worse. Such mental spasms were perversions in extremis of that uncertainty principle Marley had yammered about from time to time. Part of him determined to never again judge those people so harshly, but another part responded that committing to an act of evil with greater intensity only intensified the cowardice, stupidity, and inherent cruelty in the act. It would be far better to stop immediately and attempt to salvage what might be salvaged, but it was too late. He had committed like a base runner stealing second, and having committed, had dragged his trusting sister along behind. As the seconds crept on and more of Geezer's body became invisible in the brilliant glow emanating from his interior, Zeb's guilt was compounded by an irrepressible jolt of pleasure. Yes, pleasure, or an even more perverse visceral thrill that's demolished any sense of morality, clamoring for respect from a tiny vestigial nook in my soul. Like an insane, all-powerful mythical deity, I'm in the thrall of the magnitude and gravity of the wild physical phenomenon we've set in motion. And Marley must be torn by the same ambivalence. I polluted her soul along with my own, inflicting damage not only on our former neighbor, but on the person I love above all others. By the 12th second, Marley knew Zeb was beating himself up over this. However, you can't share 9 months in the womb plus 17 years in the air world with someone without knowing what they're feeling. So guilt notwithstanding, I know I'm not alone in reveling in this outrageous thrill. Geezer's head and neck have disappeared or somehow melded with the vibrating auroral mass filling our view. The blinding glow emanating from his remaining skin pores is opening to us, and us alone, a vast new territory for science, merging biology and physics. So maybe I'm bad for loving this, but I must pay attention because I can learn something incredibly interesting here, and learning is always a good thing, and especially learning something nobody else knows, a genuine discovery. So Zeb, keep firing until the deed is done. When Geezer finally vanished altogether, Zeb ended the Wardenclyffe blast. The birds fell out of position onto the shoreline in a daze, as depleted as Marley and her brother. Time remained dilated, allowing her to wonder what lay ahead in the next tumultuous minute of their lives, which were relentlessly approaching yet another corner. It was silent now, but for Arcs pecking at the sandy spot in Jarwall where Geezer had last stood. Marley knew if simply she turned her head, she would see Jupiter brighter than ever before, possibly even as a brilliant little disk rather than a point of light. That was a lure, but she hesitated, knowing the turning would lead to locking eyes with someone she loved and with whom she had just conspired in shameful manslaughter. And what of their victim? Could he possibly have survived in some form? Had they doomed him to existence in some terrible, freakish state worse than death? Might his attack on Shang destroy them all? Or might he take vengeance on them whom he had railed against as brats, punks, and pests, and do them in first? Or might he just shine it on ahead to Jupiter? That was all he wanted anyway. Marley! She looked over at Zeb with a tight, synthetic smile. You all right? That merited raucous laughter the way a spark would ignite kindling, but current circumstances permitted her only tremulous questions. Where did he go? Did we kill him? With no clue to fashion into an intelligent response, Zeb shrugged nervously, disappointed in himself for disappointing her. Had it not been for those magnificent radiolaria and the hours of incredible adventure that had preceded them, he never would have agreed to blast Geezer. Perhaps the damned obsession with the fantastical that had propelled his forays into illustrated storytelling had pushed him over the brink into a cataclysmic failure of judgment. Yes, Geezer had threatened them, but Zeb had wanted to do it. He'd goaded himself into buying Geezer's suggestion that his transmogrification might be reversed, but that just provided him cover for satisfying his curiosity's rapacious lust. He had let himself be played, and Marley knew it as well as he. Suddenly his self-censure collapsed in yet another wave of astonishment, so thrilling his tear ducts stung. A great forest of dark brown spires and towers, tinted with green and hints of orange, was rising slowly in their awed view of space outside the jar. Zeb flashed on a vast Bryce Canyon amphitheater that had somehow become aurorized and shot through with intense colors. He heard the tone of Marley's dismay, though not her words, for it was dawning on him just what they were beholding. That's the top of one of Geezer's irises! The full eye, the height of a Douglas fir, appeared before them. Like a retreating octopus, Geezer swept himself backward so they could see what they had wrought. Geezer! Marley exclaimed. Zeb replied in a hush, Aurora Geezer. So that's your little taste of the Book of Geezer. And we're supposed to have comments, questions, but I'm not sure if that happens now or after Tobey's reading.
What was the question?
I was asking, are we going to have time for questions now or after the second reading?
Gosh,
It's up to you.
well, let's have Tobey
Okay.
read, and then we'll open the
Okay.
brief.
Tobey Hiller.
So John Teton, thank you so much. Tobey will follow, and we'll all explain her variation on the speculative fiction theme.
Okay, can you just make sure that I'm at the right
Yeah,
height there? I'm
sorry.
not that, thank you.
Yes, down a bit would make sense. If I
Yeah.
could.
Does that sound good? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, John. Wow. And thank you, Bert and Beckett, and all the folks that have made this possible. This is a wonderful place to read. It's a really great place. I'll just say a little bit about myself, and then I'll read. I'm speculative fiction. Well, I write both realist and fabulist fiction. I'm interested in writers like Borges and Calvino, and so I'm interested in the surreal and the splinters of kind of what we think of as magic that come into daily life. And I'm interested in that because I think that, in fact, daily life and all life is kind of mysterious, So, like John, I'm also very interested in the intersection of science and art. I've published a lot of prose, poetry, flash, and stuff, a lot of different kinds of stuff, which makes it kind of hard sometimes to tell, for a publisher to tell what you're doing. So this book, called Flight Advice, a Fabulary, is a fabulous collection, and I'm very interested in fables and myths and fairy stories, the things we tell ourselves to explain what's really going on. So you'll hear echoes of that in what I read. The first thing I'm going to read is called Fable with Wings. She was born with wings, but no knowledge of flying. Her parents never commented. Maybe they didn't notice, since at first the wings were more like nubs or odd bumps, and anyway, they were often too busy with the drama of the day's many log jams and potholes to notice much but each other's inadequacies. When she herself noticed the wings, they seemed like 6 toes or something, useless appendages, though at least not as froggy as extra toes. At first, she hid them. If she stood a certain way and dressed right, they seemed pretty much like large shoulder blades. Later, she wound beads and scarves in their feathers and tied them into a plume like a long ponytail and made them into a fashion accessory. Then, one high summer noon, she saw how free and light, how sweetly deep that blue dome above her was. Maybe the wings actually worked. And well, come to find out, they did. Her first few flights were careful, up into leaves, a bit of leaf muss and flurry, awkward bounce forward onto branches, teeter, and then an exultant perch on a branch, almost in the clouds it felt like, looking down with no fear. On her next aerial adventure, practicing swoop turns above a meadow, she encountered a large raven dangling some grapes above a fox's raised and drooling mouth. "What are you doing?" "Shh," said the raven. "I'm concentrating." "Yeah, beat it," said the fox. "I've just about got him hypnotized." Her first thought had been sympathetic to Fox. She'd always had a soft spot for those pointy noses and furry tails, and of course that red, but, given this last remark, Raven's burnished black seemed no less striking, possibly even more attractive than Fox's red. Interesting, like the undetermined contest between ground and sky. So she tried to hover. The problem was her starboard wing had a tendency to pull. This caused first a slow drift and then a faster veer, and abruptly she went into a spin, unfortunately in the moment's crisis flapping her arms instead of her wings. Blam, ruffle, thud, as she careened into Raven, whose hover she had time to notice before she bashed into him was perfect. Most of the grape cluster in the commotion dropped into Fox's mouth, and, alert as always, he immediately swallowed both the grapes and Raven's foot. Raven squawked loudly, beat his wings frantically, and actually managed to drag Fox, clamped onto his foot with grape juice running down his jaw upward off the ground. Fox looked down at friend Earth as it grew farther away beneath the glorious red of his tail, now tucked between his hind legs. Excuse me. Raven pumped his wings. Grab her! Grab that thing with the hair, Raven squawked. Grab her instead. She's bigger. Uh-oh, she thought, thinking of those sharp little teeth, and accelerated when she should have braked, ending dangerously close to the melee. Fox opened his mouth and made a snap at her foot, which, being nimble in that department at least, she snatched back just in time. The sound of his teeth snapping in air lingered in her mind. A thud, a most unfox-like yowl, and Fox, now a reddish-brown heap on the ground, quickly metamorphosed into a ragged streak of iron oxide afterimage that disappeared into a bush. There was a sound of whining from the greenery. Raven flew up close to her and peered at her with his black, calculating eye. Don't fly too well, girlie, do you? I offer lessons, cheap. This one is called Hair. These stories, there are a lot of different kinds of stories in here. Some of them are long, some of them are short. This one mentions Lilith. I don't know if you know who Lilith is, but she was allegedly Adam's first wife. And amongst Catholics, she's sometimes described as a demon. And it also mentions Osiris, Isis, and Orion. They're all, brought together in an odd sort of a way. So, and it's about how hair appeared in the world. Hair. A long time ago, and you're probably going to find this hard to believe, women, and men too, though that probably wasn't important, were bald. Bald, you will say. How awful. Do you mean bald? Bald? Yes, I do. Bald as a rock, bald as an egg, bald as a dirt patch in the backyard where the chickens like to roam. Bald as a ringing gong, and just as beautiful, though of course this baldness was silent. This was in a time before mirrors, and Lilith, whose ancestry we will not tabulate here since it causes so much ruckus, was bald too, as a bat. Though bats do have a hair or two sticking out, Lilith had one or two too. This did not bother her or cause plucking and primping, since there were no mirrors, and the occasional glimpse she caught of herself in pools or puddles only confirmed the impression she had gotten from the behavior of others, which was that she looked fine, perhaps more than fine, even though her skull might bounce light back like a billiard ball, a class of balls which hadn't been invented yet, by the way. One day, like other days, for they came in a stream, just like now, but more so, the sun came up, big, round, golden, bald, as you may have noticed. Baldness is a much more pervasive quality than it first appears. On this day, Lilith had decided to visit her 3 children by her first husband, Adam. I hate to mention this, as you might begin to think I've got a bee in my bonnet, whatever that means, but her children, 2 sons and a daughter, were also bald. No one cared, really. So hairless, Lilith went along the road, singing to herself. Lilith gets very bad press. You know how easily history can get rewritten, but really, I can tell you 2 things about her most people don't know anymore. She wasn't any more of a demon than people usually are when everyone keeps tracking mud into the house, and she had a beautiful singing voice which could and did tame the average beast. she came to a river, which was blue, wide, and very cold. She would need to ford it, or swim it, or hire a boat. No boatman occurred. No obvious bridging methods appeared. The river, serenely running along, looked very blue, that particular blue that bespeaks ice in the bone when you enter it. So swimming seemed unattractive, though Lilith was always ready for adventure and took independent action on a daily basis, one thing that distinguished her from her later cousin, Eve. She continued to sing to herself as she contemplated her situation, since she found that often helped with cogitation, and besides, it was soothing. As she sang, she walked along the edge of the river, rushing and hurrying, and yet quite beautiful. It ran between its banks like a woman running a long way through a desert without thirst. And Lilith thought how beautiful the motion and curling of it, how the length and combing fingers of it soothed the earth, and that, even though it was preventing her from forward progress in her plan to visit her 3 children, it was like a woman, though it had something, some running, fluid thing that no woman had, or man for that matter, though she did not at this moment, I'm afraid, think about what men had. Having been born a woman, she tended to compare herself, when comparison came up, with things that made the world go round: water, wind, trees, bees making honey, etc. What is that? She thought. She was looking down at the river, and there, close to the bank, she saw river plants growing at the margin. Long strands, they waved and danced in the currents of the river, and seeing their long tendrils, she thought, that is most beautiful. And of a sudden moment, though of course all moments are sudden, it is simply that some seem to make much more of a splash than others, she thought, now if I had a part of me that waved and rippled like that, it would add to my strength, it would augment my beauty, it would make me more like the world in all its wonder. Now, if this were a fairy story, Lilith would immediately find a way to make this magic. However, since this is only a how story, one of those stories that merely explains the way of the world, things do not travel on so famously or easily. The how of things always has an ache in it. Whatever Lilith thought, the next thing that happened was that because she was so preoccupied with the lovely curling and snaking of the plants, she lost her footing and lickety-split, faster than you can pull any rabbit out of your hat, much faster, in fact, she fell into the water. Bald pate shining, pretty arms flailing, mouth no longer full of music, instead full of water. She tumbled, she rolled, and around her she felt the cool tendrils and plates of the water plants. The plants thought her very beautiful and quite hysterical, for back in this time it was news to no one that plants could think. Though annoyed by her splashing and heaving, they began, for the sake of her beauty, to figure out what she needed. Air! She needs air! Shouted one plant, whose fondness for CO2 hadn't prevented her from studying the odd habits of mammals. But another one, whose intuitive capacities had always been admired by everyone, said, but she wants to be one of us. She likes fluidity. She likes running. She wants tangle and curl. Grab her! Hold on! Nonsense, yelled another. Plants in disagreement can really be quite argumentative. She'll drown if we don't get her onto land. Stop tangling her up. But with all the river water pouring downstream, and the plants waving and rippling, and Lilith gasping and rolling and swallowing water, the end came faster than one would have anticipated, and too soon, and with a finality unsuited to the middle of a tale. There was Lilith, no longer breathing, rolling in the long, tangled fronds of the water plants at the wild river's edge. Drowned, you say? Oh no, how can this be? But at this very moment, the eldest of her 3 children, Usir, later called Osiris, and not famous for anything yet, and certainly not yet wise in the ways of the living and the dead since he was only 16, turned up. At once, aghast, he pulled Lilith out of the water and tried to revive her. He pounded her chest and blew air into her mouth. He ordered her to wake up. She did not open her eyes. He began to weep. He pounded the ground. Around her head were wrapped the leaves and tangles of the river plants. "O river," he wailed, "O sun, O leaves and water, return me my mother, whose death is not yet ready. Change her or mark her, but bring her back. Oh, please." But nothing happened, except that Lilith was turning blue, or more exactly, greenish-purple. Usir ran off to find Orion, Lilith's second son, whom he'd left behind some bushes, setting a trap for rabbit. As yet, Orion wasn't very good at catching game, and just now he was practicing a new method, snares. But as soon as Usir yanked him up, panting, yelling, and pointing, he forgot all thought of rabbits, and lickety-split they both arrived back at Lilith's corpse, now a quite unlively shade of puce. Orion fell on his knees beside her, staring at the strange black stuff on her head. "Where the hell is Isis?" yelled Usir, who wanted his sister there, too. Orion stared down at his mother. "Oh, geez, anachronistic as that may sound," he said. "Mom!" he yelled. Before this, she had always waked up when he yelled that loud. "Isis!" wailed Usir, because he knew they all three, her children, needed to be there if anything was to happen. And lo and behold, his 13-year-old sister, Isis, who had been picking lotuses just down the way, came running up. And when she saw her mother all green and still, she grabbed her own cheeks and began to rock back and forth. "Quick, quick, stop that screeching and come here," said Usir, who tended to order his younger sister about. This time she didn't argue, and then they all three wove their hands together and stood around Lilith, staring down at what looked much too much like a corpse, and each realized in that electrical moment that they would be scattered, limb from limb, heart from heart, that sky and water, and indeed the dead, risen and wandering, would be their destinies. Then Usir spoke again, the same words he had before, holding tight his brother and sister's hands, whom he had not yet lost to legend. "O river," he wailed, "O sun, O leaves and water, return me my mother, whose death is not yet ready. Change her, or mark her, but bring her back, O please." And because Usir's voice and love were so powerful, and because longing is in the motion of all things, and because the three of them were in it together, a rare conjunction, the river heard, and the plants of the river heard, and the flow and running of the river heard, and Lilith awoke. She gagged, she coughed. Water streamed from her mouth. She looked up and saw her children, constellations of all her sky. And now, around her head, which had been formerly bald, was a wriggle and wreath of dark hair, running in ringlets and tangles, to signify that she was forever of the river, and that her life belonged now partly to water, partly to peril, and partly to wish. She kissed Usir and Orion and Isis on their still childish cheeks, and touched her no longer bald pate. And suddenly, on her children's heads, too, fine hair sprouted, dark, red, or blonde, curly and straight, showing how all humans, from now on, would be partly river and daily reminded that tangle and flow, a confusion of outcomes, a tide and tangle of embellishment, were all part of the matter, which never, from one day to the next, could remain the same. And now, thank you. I timed that, so that's a lot less than 25, so I'm going to read two poems, shortish poems, from this book, Crow Mine, which is my last poetry book. The first one is Crawdaddy Crow. Harder to see as I grow crawdaddy myself, 16, okay. Crawdaddy Crow. Crawdaddy Crow sidled sidewise down fence, watching squirrel pump his loud tail. Nuts are the subject and object. Noise, chit-chit and caw, the notice of what will out. Crawdaddy keeps his cool, flaunts his black, epaulets, lets wind carry its feather news his way. The strategy's the double deal behind barks blank. When Crow was knighted, he did not bow. He noticed that the sword descending truncated grandfather tree. He's good at side effects. He kept his eye on where the nuts fell, watched the telltale flag of squirrel's tail. When he croaked, "Nevermore," this was taken at face value, though Sir Crawdaddy Crow knows nothing happens in heaven or earth that will happen nevermore. Okay, and there's This is the last one. Thank you. It's called Luster. Crow shines as the darkest star. Light burrows into the coal of him, blacks down to diamond, bounces off his sharp facets into midnight's noon. It is his cloak and dagger. He wears it on his shoulders, the way Mercury wore flight and cunning, armor, trumpet, name of what black is underneath the sun. Luster's reason is without preamble. The first cause is always light. Thank you very much. I do have. Thank you. I do have both these books for sale if you're interested. And this, I just do want to say about this, that this is a friend of mine named Liz Ennis, a local. She lives in Berkeley, and this is her painting.
Do it on the mic, and then the world can hear you.
Oh.
We don't care about that. Yes, we do.
This painting on the cover of this book is by my friend Elizabeth Ennis, who's a really fine local painter. And this is also by, this is a detail of a painting by a friend of mine named Jeffrey Long. This is a painting of crows.
Thank you, Toby.
So I do want to thank Tobey and John very much. So, John, you would like to entertain a couple of questions? You're hoping you provoked baffled moments in people's minds, or we could time-wise, we maybe have 5 minutes we could devote to that. If I don't know the format, how that would work. Are there people, in fact, who have questions that they would like to bring up, or we insist you? John insists you have some. No, I'm kidding. But no. Well, I guess everything is self-explanatory to the extent that anything can be self-explanatory. I thank you, everyone. We're going to have a short break, probably, in the 5 to 7 minute vicinity, and then we'll have the open mic. And anybody who's wants to read and hasn't signed up, please let me know, and I will sign you up. All right.
Oh, no, yeah. One of my favorite sections. Yeah. Top one. Yeah, he goes into, he basically, it's a very emotional language there. He basically says that all Way out there. Exactly. Speculative fiction. Is it all from fiction? I guess there's different types of fiction. Yeah. Literal fiction. Yeah. Literal fiction. Yeah, that's actually could have happened. Could have happened. Oh, I see.
I guess all that stuff is.
The mystery of all those things that were mystery for the future. Would that be sort of? Yes, although it's so real. It's real, yeah. Yeah, that's something that could happen. Very real. That's fiction that could happen in the next 10 years. Maybe not the wonderful spaceship that's the gigantic blimp airship.
You're like,
I love that.
you're
So it,
15th and what? Oh, that's great. You've got everything. Oh, yeah.
I saw John's movie 30 years ago, Right Stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was involved in that.
Yeah, I'll either, that's the only place.
Watch the whole past summer of the Marco War.
I tried it, yeah. I tried. Not for books. Oh, I do for some. Yeah, well, yeah, Jeff Bezos, no, I'm ashamed. Yeah, but, yeah, it's bad. He's gross. But yes, but I will go on and read about the books. Okay, financial status. Right, and then I come here to order.
When the Pliny
It's
the
really
Elder.
busy. Just check it out.
Pliny the Elder. Should, yeah, that's
Just bought sweater. Oh, must.
Pliny the Elder. Taking some various craft
Meet John.
Hi, Bruce. Oh, hi, Bruce. Art, the artist comes from Brooklyn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't. I told her.
I do. Yeah, and Tobey is a good friend.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So what brings you?
We were in Paris together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was so fun being at the studios. Yeah, I went from one to the next. I only stopped at 3 places.
Jeff told me this and I have glasses are yeah, I can stop by. Yeah. I met him actually in my house. Oh. You hadn't seen him since?
Yeah, I'm recovering from
No,
this.
this is oh, wow. I didn't know that actually before. But somehow you made the connection. Yeah, you knew your place. I think he's been up to your place with the camera.
Yeah, the mic is
For sure.
Yeah.
You want to stand in the middle? Why don't you stand
Yeah,
in the middle?
I'll stand in the middle. That's good.
All right. Great. You gave me one. Okay. Good, very much. No.
Okay, great. And I also want to get one of the two of you.
Oh, okay.
Oh, this is a photograph.
Friends waiting for me, John. How did you see
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what's happened, but there's a red dot on here now.
That means
Jenny?
it's probably
On video?
video, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's not, and, but normally it says photo, or there it is. Yeah, we'll have to do it the three of us again, because I don't know.
Phones can be slippery.
Yeah.
Mine is slippery all the time.
1, 2. Okay, we need to do this again. This was,
You know, your book is so
it was on video or something.
thick and complicated in a certain kind of way. I mean, it's very full of rich detail. that,
Okay.
We gotta do it again.
Yeah.
It's hard to read something like that out and have
Okay,
people.
1, 2, 3. You ready? Ready? Okay. It was on photo that time.
Okay,
I mean,
great.
I have a good.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think I have a good capacity to follow. You know,
I was reading
So
that
you're
fast.
John?
Yes.
well, it's hard not to when you're reading. You know, something.
But I don't remember.
You want people to get the whole drift, and it's a very. It's a complex book, you know.
Yeah, and there I had to refer to things which had happened earlier, which I
Well,
haven't.
you were very clear. Your
1980.
your description of what's going on and what goes on in the book was extremely articulate, very clear. Yeah.
Yeah, that was an aim that I had because science fiction writers are sometimes just kind of listing wild ideas, but the characters are very, very secondary.
Yes, I know. No, these characters
Now we all have
are
children.
quite
They
full
have
of
3 and a
life and
grandchild.
Good, thank you. Glad to hear that.
yeah.
And I would say you were able to do that as well with one thing that this didn't make clear. Ark was just in the first part of the book, but later on there are various birds and other animals who are intelligent, highly intelligent, as was Raven, for example.
That's interesting news. I hadn't gotten to that part, and you know, one of my big things is that we are animals, and that you know, animals. The animal kingdom is full of actualities we don't notice, and cognitions we don't understand, and feelings we pay no attention to, and you know.
Right, but
So,
that's
yeah.
a major theme in the latter part of this book, because it says that there are a very small fraction of animals who are highly intelligent, easily on par with humans, and participate in a reporting process, the ultimate recipients of which is there are known, that they have to send these reports out. And so there are field reporters, there's editors, there's translators. Among, you know, you might see one crow able to accomplish all this, and 10 crows around them that can only say far less.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in fact, I think that's actually true in the animal kingdom. That in each species there are, you know, individualities as far as level of intelligence and sociability and all that stuff goes. I read this really interesting study. Well, it wasn't a study; it was in science. The science section of the New York Times. They're doing some post-mortem studies on lizards. And they found that lizards, for one thing, lizards pair up. They're kind of monogamous in the sense that they mate with one lizard, and they nudge each other.
I'm just standing.
Yeah,
Because I was sitting on
they have found lizards.
Right, folks, in about another minute or so.
Which makes you think of lizards. So maybe we make assumptions we don't, you know. Are you?
Yeah, we're gonna start in a moment.
So I assume that everyone who's going to read is signed up. I think that is the case. Sure.
Are you reading?
All right, guys, everybody get set up, and we're going to do the open mic session. Okay, so we have 7 people signed up to read. The first of whom is Paul Slade. I'm going to start with just read a little short poem to kick things off. But I'm not going to start yet until I get the word. Okay. This is entitled Maestro, If You Please. So many things I'm reluctant to talk about without using unintelligible semaphores, swaths of starlight, roaring cement mixers, unraveling knots. Intimacy is impossible, says a well-heeled expert drowning in blonde backwaters. Samuel Beckett earned every wrinkle in the tarmac of his speeding face. I think I owe taxes. I think I own Texas. My father tried to read at least one book every 10 years, but some decades boiled over, tired out. He loved him some vocabulary, though, and let me flourish if I just took out the garbage intermittently. And we both loved a little soft shoe, a little traveling music, maestro, if you please. All right, thank you. Paul Slade. He's on the cusp of our edition, are we right?
Yes, it did, very much so, yes. Well, I'm a geezer that grew up in the sunset, so I don't handle the sun too well. This is a Mendo Mind. From San Francisco north to Mendocino with my friend Mendel, he's in the bottled production of enology business. We did not need the cartographer's discipline. We knew the way. We followed the yellow lines and the Raptors' trajectories. Over the hills on 128, down to the coast, to the ocean, angry despite its name. On Highway 1, north past Mendocino Village, that funky, very white Carmel North enclave. 10 miles to Fort Bragg, a city town with more butane than boutique, where the workers walk the streets and enter through the front doors. Checked into the Surf Motel, $75 not to see or hear the tides. The next morning, walking at the intersection on 1, near the gluten-proud McDonald's, traffic lights guide me like a Moses dividing a sea of AAA minions. I cross the road with electronic programmed safety. Down the road to a state park, Winslow Homer houses on the coastal plain, silent witnesses on the edge of a continent. State Park, got close to the cliffs, heard the sea, didn't get too close. The lichened crowns on the tops of the copper-colored jagged rocks, shiny in their salty brine with their impressionist colors, warned me about the tempest below. Rocks jutted out of the surf, warnings for navigators that they were already in peril. Did I hear the marine denizens in a chorus calling for me to join them? With an armed, flailing, Icarus-inspired dive into the froth and kelp, so the sea lions could bark out Olympic scores about my form? Would Neptune have tried to drag me down to Davy Jones' funeral parlor as my blue body bobbed in the swells? A battle between scavengers and the Coast Guard. I rejected their echoes. I want to live. I stood firmly in situ, gravitas of my skeleton, amongst the Aragonum, Pacific gum, stonecrop, and seaside daisies. Before I left, I listened for the silent creatures, their movements reverberating in the pitch of manzanilla. Above, a hawk circled, arabesque, sustaining tranquility. I hoped it would never have to make fun of a drone. On the road back, deer in the field, 26 eyes. I stopped and stared at them. We were in a Sergio Leone Mendocino standoff. Their eyes focused on my street clothes camouflage and my meme-like moments. Before I moved on, I wanted to ask, hey, you whitetails, Christmas is approaching. Do any of you know Rudolph, Cupid, Donner, or Blitzen? No response. I left the scene as he waited for the next interlude with the quadruped or biped. That night, a vino veritas repast. The next morning, back to Frisco. On the undulating asphalt, a seat, foot, arm, and leg dance, weaving movements dictated by the eternal combustion and rubber on the road. Drove through a grove of redwoods, their heights pushing the bottom of the sky. No flying buttresses needed for their ascent into the heavens. Pulled into a turnout of a spike carved out of the thistle with the secure roughness of dirt and gravel. Cars zoomed by to closer sentinels. Exited the vehicle of a spike before the urban brick and mortar. Silent brain breathing, unconscious prayer, I bowed my head, thanked the elements of the earth, the flora, fauna, the creatures, for sharing their DNA with me, and maybe in the future I hoped, with fortuitous steps, I could become a humble hominid. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. And Brett Benson is next.
Can y'all hear me if I'm there right there? Yeah? Okay. All right. 2 poems. First one called Present. I am not alone in this great wide world we find ourselves in, for you are here with me. And your voice calms my nerves, your strength silently destroys my demons. For the essence is serene steadiness, enough to make the earth turn, and to foster a content beat in my heart, secure the divine stardust in my bones. And then the second one is called Essence. Before time, before identification, when we were just energy, where was it that we once came from? Before the borders were drawn, before people decided this God or that God, before we had gender, skin color, hair, or anything else, where were we from? And where are we going? I stopped asking my questions at one point because I realized that they were futile. The only thing that mattered was the present. We are here now in this form under these millions of stars. I don't know what the right answer is. I do know what the wrong answer is. The other is not my enemy. The other is a part of me. Everyone is a part of the essence, whether you look down at the smallest ant or the largest elephant and the blue whale swimming through the ocean waves. I am a part of the essence of the beginning. Whether it's my neighbor's child, or my child, or the child I see on the TV far away. No, they are not a robot. They are real. And yes, today, unfortunately, we have abundance. They are on the brink of starvation. To break down the ideologies which separate the people, I want to know what the essence is. I want to break apart that prophet, this guru, that teacher. Life is the example. Love exists, full stop. And if it exists for all. In the core of the essence, of the iceberg inside, we sit with our veins and ask, what are the answers to this? Very simply. It is that all life has value. It is that I shouldn't have to say this and screech this from mountaintops, and yet some people insist that the other is the enemy now and always. That's funny, because Hitler talked like that. Stalin talked like that. And those that would have brought destruction into this world would have said that the other is all my enemy. No, I choose to follow Jesus and say that my fellow person is my brother. I choose to follow Buddha and say all life has beauty and worth down in the essence. And if I can get quiet enough, I might see that. And if I can't, that's on me. When I ask where we're going, I realize in the question itself, it's irrelevant. I don't care what happens after this form. I care that in the now, we don't try to get into heaven. We simply act like we're deserving of it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Brett. Words of wisdom indeed. The next reader will be Vargas Zamora.
Medusa. There has been a misinterpretation, I fear. When your eyes draw me in, I become completely still, breathless, submerged into a world of wonder, having your paralyzing beauty in sight. I met you in melody. A stream carried your voice from a parallel universe. May I approach you with my feelings in hand? Once tainted in magic, you soon realize there is no return. Pinta con delicadeza esos sueños que tanto busca vivir. She trapped me, looking on when no one else would. I dream to kiss your lips every time you smile. In a flash, you pierce through, paralyzing my senses to obey only you. You're a candle, giving warmth to my heart. That fusion we embraced, an interstellar craze, we both can be ourselves. Compartimos una sonrisa cómplice mientras te besaba con los ojos por última vez. Flare dancing, a rite of passage, she mourns the ashes of her unfulfilled desires. I let go, for it allows me to understand. Dancing on the moon in plain sight, engulfed by a dream you once had at your reach. Dear Muse, I hope one day you too understand why you deserve to be admired, to be remembered, and to be loved.
Thank you, Margaret. And the next reader will be Lucy Day.
First, I'd like to say that I'm the proud publisher of the Book of Geezer, and that there are copies available here at the store if anybody wants to read the rest of the story. And in keeping with the theme of speculative writing, I'm going to read 2 speculative poems, and I would call both of these poems cellular fables. And the first one is written in the voice of a brain tumor. Small and flat, I inhabit the mind, a landscape of pale stars and electric trees, where mountains fold on fields, pearl on gray. I crouch between cells by the great salt lake of the lateral ventricle. All day I hear the hiss of blood twisting through tissue. I begin to sing. I am a tiny siren calling the capillaries to my cove. They come, red serpents coiling around me. Oh, how they love me, bringing their gifts of food and nectar. I fatten, slowly at first, then faster and faster until I am round as a planet. My cells spread everywhere, each one a seed of another self, but the skull closes over a desert tangled with old roots. Sand starts to blow. And this one is called Self-Planting Seeds. In the uneven light, they coil and uncoil, hanging by tails. Pygmy snakes, ready for self-burial. The air clings to leaf and skin. The sky turns violet and wild. Seeds drop, writhing, and people with their griefs and gametes crawl inside to drive themselves to bedrock. Inside, it is winter and silent as frozen soil, but this is the stillness of life, the time to penetrate each silvery membrane, find the nuclei of selves. The sky stretches, hardens, fades to gray, find threads of rain loosen feldspars and clay. When cells start to tumble, seed coats cracking, maybe one sleek creature will rise, speaking of winter and blackness, mitosis, endosperm, and other lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. The next reader will be Claire.
Okay, this is a true story. It's a true story, and it's explanation for my decline into alcoholism. It's called First Shift. During your shift, you should make sure you can give him snacks, but no dairy. It'll give him the runs, and the next thing you'll know, he'll have it smeared all over the house. He likes television. You need to find him a show with a lot of action. You know, car chases, people shooting each other. He especially likes screaming. This is the key to use to open the kitchen drawers. Be sure they stay locked. Otherwise, he takes out all the silverware and throws it over the fence. And this key is to the cupboard, which should also stay locked. He likes to eat the flour, the whole canister if he can. You would not believe the mess it makes. Though you have no reason to use them, just so you know, the blender, food processor, and coffee grinder are on top of the cupboard. He likes to plug them in and turn them on. I don't know why, because he always gets agitated and ends up screaming and banging his head against the wall. And yes, he does like to play with his Winky. He is only allowed to do that in his bedroom and the bathroom. Unfortunately, he likes to do it in the middle of the living room. That's why we try to keep the curtains closed. When he does it, you just need to take him by the elbow and guide him into his bedroom. For dinner, there are fish sticks in the freezer and a package of peas. You want to bake the fish sticks, but he prefers to eat the peas frozen. In fact, he'll only eat them if they're frozen, so take them out at the last minute. Before he eats, he'll want to walk around the table 3 times. Don't interfere because he might bite you. Whatever you do, let him squeeze the ketchup himself. If you try to do it, he'll grab it from you and make a complete mess. Of course, you need to take it right back from him when he's done, otherwise he'll try to drink it all. Make sure that he takes off his clothes before he gets into the shower. He has no problem running around the house naked, but he likes to shower in his clothes. He has a CD player next to his bed. Before he goes to sleep, he likes to listen to Bohemian Rhapsody. He'll listen to it twice, and then you need to turn it off right away, or he'll throw the CD player across the room. Don't turn out the light until you know that he's asleep. Otherwise, he'll start screaming and it will be very difficult to calm him down. Once he's asleep, you can clean up the kitchen. You can't do it when he's awake because he'll grab the sponge from you and stuff it in his mouth and then run away. When you're done cleaning up, there's always laundry to do. He goes through so many clothes in one day. The washer and dryer are downstairs. He's quick. If he wakes you up while you're down there, he'll be out the front door in a flash, with or without his pajamas. Now, this is your first shift, so he's going to try and test you. Just stay firm and don't let him intimidate you. He's really just a typical teenager underneath it all.
Oh my God. A comic masterpiece. Oh my goodness. Ron Myers is the next reader.
Hello. Let's see what we got here. This is called Light Pollution. Where do I stand? King Jupiter and Perigee will guide us now on the white striped ribbon into cobalt night falling on mossy Olympic Peninsula rainforests, vast networks of fungal roots all abuzz. Great cities of towering trees fill the mountain valleys, survivors of the great forest genocides, giant cedar, spruce, hemlock, fir, pointing to mighty Orion, so close you can touch him. A trillion sun warriors behind him, locked in slow-pitched battles of succession. Excuse me. That's the first one. An Eleusinian mystery. A high-pitched scree announces invisible presence of a hawk, piercing chaotic sound debris of a street of commerce, before finally appearing on the scene from behind the sky-blocking towers on Union Square, looping repeatedly over the Starlight Room, topping the Gothic revival Sir Francis Drake Hotel, a looming temple to Moloch, according to Ginsberg. As she conducts her survey, the sun rays transluce her red tail feathers, a pulsing telegraph. A vaguely Mediterranean high-fashion guy in the artisanal doorway of a building from a more glamorous decade. He primps his substantial wares, allure by an amorous Hades into his costly lair. Such a magnificent thyrsus. It seems old rituals revive spontaneously in perpetuity. I guess the city is slowly waking up, coming back to life again. Let's see, what else? Those are too long. Oops. Okay, this is called Reading Greek Poetry for Lawrence Ferlinghetti upon his death. In airy amphitheaters where actors and the audience become one, the moon rises, the chorus awakes, the monad forsakes his solitary ways, pouring through codex and scrolls of tragic plays. Panegyrics and dithyrambs, the setting of the thespian sun, to find the right words to better say what can't be said in fading odes and elegies from the golden age before they turn to dust. The thrill of the hunt. The lunatics are at full pitch now, baying at the moon. They can smell its blood. They lust to taste it. Such is their superior vision and direct line to their high God, adored in rites of hatred and violence. Their first commandment being, brutality is its own justification, such a savage God you worship. A dark spell, this iconotropism, has turned you away from the primal love that created us all. Did you mock your own Savior's original message, fallen into a late decadent stage now? Perverted by religious narcissists who wouldn't know Christ if the hounds of hell bit them in the ass? And they probably will someday. Warning, oh, devolving naysayers of the loveless void, the sacred trees see everything you send over their network, and their roots are deep, their conspiracy wide. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ron. And the concluding
Thank
poem
you.
of the evening will be August Bleed.
Thank you. I appreciate the last time you describing me as the last poet right before you closed the bookstore. I used that in a submission letter, and we'll see how it goes. I really did. I said, I have been described as the last poet right before they closed the bookstore. And here I am again, the last poet. This is called On the Preface of the Millennium. He had nothing to say, though I had spent my life waiting for his word. Instead, he pointed to the window where my own shadow was silhouetted, looking in. A vast, unharvested field lay beyond. He pointed again, this time at the picture nailed to the wall, in which there was neither cross, Christ, nor thieves, only the bare hill of Golgotha and the solitary moon, like an omnipotent eye, circling witness. That was the first one. These are both really short. That's my dog, by the way. I don't know why she does that. She's 14 though. I figure if I live to be about 100 years old, I could do whatever I want, right? Yeah. The epilepsy of the dead leaves me breathless.
The empty page is my uncarved headstone, my pen, an invitation to death. Mountains of snowy firs swallow me, a graveyard the size of the earth, heaving roots where fingers, too narrow to bridge the distance between life and death, tear the world apart. A fine skin of ink eats my flesh like poetry. The death of me grows, sprouts layers of decay into something almost human.
Thank you, audience.
Thank you.
No, I want to thank everyone who came tonight as audience, as participant, and we do this every first Thursday of the month, basically from 7 to 9, and with a couple of features and then a short break and then an open session. So tell people who would like to have a forum for their literary endeavors, we're here and would love to see them. So thanks so much.
So every second and fourth Monday of the month,